What I'm going to talk about today is compound registration. That might be a little irritating for some of you because usually I'm talking here about the biologics part. But since last year my role has changed, I'm now also the kind of product manager for compound registration at ChemAxon, for the reason that we're trying to combine the kind of biological registration aspects with the compound registration aspects. I'm going to give you today a little update about what's new in compound registration, a little introduction ahead of that, and then I kind of reiterate on the theme that you've heard by Mark yesterday already on the AGNOSTIC combined registration system. What is a compound registration? What's it good for? First of all, I'm seeing this on this screen, but I'm not seeing this. Okay, wonderful. Registration is important because what you want to answer is the question, when I made something in the lab, did I ever do that already? Or is it something that's completely novel? Because everybody knows if I have to repeat my experiments, this is going to be very expensive. So a lot of the kind of, say, responsibility of a compound registration system is about the decision whether something is unique amongst the set of molecules I already own. The second part of it is, however, this is sometimes not a very easy decision. So a lot of organizations have very different views on what they consider to be unique and what they don't consider to be unique, and how they would like to group like similar compounds, salted structures, for example, together. So in that respect, compound registration also has to offer the capability of setting up very complex business rules and registration workflows. Then the next question is about how do people actually submit compounds to the registration system? Now, everybody knows that scientists really hate sitting in front of their laptop and filling out forms, especially when you're doing library-based screenings or things like that. Well, you have to do this for a couple of thousand compounds. Not really appreciated. So what we aim to do is here we provide a mechanism that lets you embed the registration capabilities into the systems the scientists typically interact with, like an electronic lab notebook or a LIMS system, from which the compounds that are about to be stored in the registry are then just directly piped in through an API-level integration. And that points us to the last point on that slide. It's really important. That's the core, say, intellectual property database on chemical structures that you're looking at that has feeder systems upstream, and that has consumer systems downstream when you want to aggregate biological data that has been measured in experiments downstream of the actual synthesis of your compounds. That's a very simplistic summary of what our registration system does. Consider that you have an input, and there's a couple of cases that you need to kind of distinguish. If you have a valid structure, there is no problems with the structure quality and with the data that is submitted alongside. It just gets registered, a new corporate identifier is assigned, and we're done. There might be an issue that is, let's say, the bonds of your structure are a bit oddly drawn, so this is something where we could say, well, we can run some standardization procedures on this, make it look nice, but nobody really has to interact because that's a problem that can be automatically fixed. Fine, we can register this by the configuration that we're able to set up in the system. There might be other cases, however, where it's not so easy because we don't know what would be the expectation to fix that. So there might be problems where really a human being has to go in and say, well, there is a data problem, I need to correct that data problem. For these specific cases, we have something that we term a staging area. Essentially, it's an additional place where anything that you kind of submit to the registration system gets caught that doesn't match the kind of validation rules that are set up in the system. And then someone who's authorized can go in there and say, I'm going to correct this because I know how it's supposed to look like. This is how it looks from the web interface that we're providing with compound registration. So we have a form-based input. You can draw your structure here. We have a couple of switches that let you kind of see some advanced modes on registration. You can have some live structure checking, stereo analyzing that helps chemists especially in order to recognize how should they actually draw a certain stereochemistry information that they know by their analytical procedures, but they may not be very familiar how to express this within the chemical file formats on how to draw this in their chemical sketchers. So that's a helper utility that say prevents in many cases wrong drawings of the structure initially. What we have done in the last year is actually something that addresses a use case where lately we're seeing more and more people are doing larger reaction screens where they have multiplexed parallel synthesis of compounds. So it's not a one-by-one synthesis, but you really deal with a lot of molecules at once. And for this reason, we decided to kind of improve our workflow when dealing with the upload of SD files that contain hundreds to thousands of structures. And you're seeing here on the right-hand side a depiction of a couple of things that we have added lately. So first of all, every upload is like stored as an event within the system. Administrators would be able to see all those. Each of these bulk uploads comes with a summary where you say how many of those of the file have been processed already. What's the state of the currently read compounds? You see there are a couple of, well, I have deleted some submissions because they were added erroneously. I have a couple of failed submissions. There are some that are in a state where they would still be awaiting approval before they ultimately get registered. And I also have a couple of registered compounds already. Now for the failed ones, we further break down into various error categories that give you a hint about what might have gone wrong. That's especially helpful in case you have one particular error category that's showing up for most of your failed submissions. You might want to just download those failed submissions, correct them in an external tool like a workflow pipeline tool, something like that. In order to resubmit this, you can then update your submissions and proceed with your library registration. Also, once you're done, you can download a PDF report that essentially gives you all of that information in a summary PDF. Attach this to your experiment in your electronic lab notebook, and then all of your documentation is done. We also have seen that more and more people are dealing with, let's say, entities that aren't yet defined by their structure. It's samples that arrive in the lab. You want to measure some experimental data against those, but you might just really characterize those after the fact. So for these cases, we have also improved our no structure handling. So these are things that you register, they get a corporate identifier, but actually they do not contain any structures at the moment of registration. And we also, of course, are able to kind of bulk upload them, add new lots to those based on referencing already existing corporate identifiers. Now, how does a typical deployment scenario look like? And probably this slide might be a little overwhelming, but I'll take you through that. At the core of it, we have the actual compound registration application that sits on a web server, and it communicates with a database. It could be MySQL or Oracle that actually contains all of the information that's persisted from the system. For direct user interaction, we have a web front end, runs in any modern major browser. And downstream of the compound registration, we have something that is a message queue system. That is a system that essentially collects a log of activities within the registration database in order to, for downstream consumer systems, publish information about what has been changed in respect to the compounds. So you can kind of grab from there the information about new additions, updates, or deletions in order to feed a kind of data mart or data warehouse of which most of your aggregation with biological data would happen. In this way, the kind of performance issue is moved away from the registration database, and you have your kind of fine-tuned data marts for downstream searching, for example. On the other side of the application, there's a number of ways how to feed the application with compounds. What I've mentioned before is you can feed this from an electronic lab notebook. We have standing integrations with, say, the IDBSE workbook, or with the Oxprint ELN or Perkin-Elmer ELN. We have other upstream systems that could be, for example, an inventory system. So we also have a standing integration with Tisch and Mosaic, for example. You could also access the whole thing through rather an API or through a pipeline tool like Pipeline Pilot or KNIME. We have native Pipeline Pilot components. If you would like to use KNIME, that's also possible, but you have to use the generic REST web service nodes for that. And we also have the ability to set up services that essentially pull information from upstream databases about new compounds that arrive there and then get automatically fed back into the registration database. As you see this, there is a lot of connection points to different software systems required for a registration system, because that's at the heart of literally everything that deals with chemical structure. So it is also important to be able to, say, enhance or extend things that may not come out of the box. And for this, we actually have a couple of extension points, and I'm naming a few examples here. Some people may be interested in creating a very bespoke identifier format that isn't supported by our sequence generator out of the box. Our services team can help to create a Java class, simple code snippet in order to add a new custom ID generator, for example, in these cases. We have a number of built-in validators for structure content and structure quality. At the same time, we also have the ability to validate parts of the additional data that comes alongside the individual compounds. Also there, if there is something that is a more complex rule, say nested ifs, if this field has that value, then do something in one of the other fields, then we would be able to kind of extend this with custom validators. We also have a couple of points within the web interface where we can enhance this with direct links to other applications. One of the examples you're seeing here, we've added a new button to the registration summary that you typically see whenever your submission has been registered in the system. And then you could go right here to your inventory and add to that corresponding corporate identifier a number of samples. The reverse way could also work, but that's the responsibility of the inventory. We have this up and running in production with a couple of customers, but then again, talk rather with your inventory provider on how to register things that you're creating in your sample management system. Also, we have been talking a little bit about the downstream systems. The question there becomes, which shape should the data have for the downstream systems to work effectively? While there is a downstream client that comes out of the box, you may want to reshape the data, and we can help you with customizing how the data finally arrives in the consumer systems. The question that's coming typically after that is, okay, can you run this on cloud? Do you have to run this in-house? The answer is, it is an application that was designed for on-premise deployment. However, we are having the ability to also deploy this on cloud-hosted environments like Amazon or Google or anything else, virtual private clouds, whatever you have. And also, that's something we've presented last year at the BioIT conference in Boston. We also have now an Amazon Marketplace image. We can go to the Amazon Marketplace. You have a category there that says Life Science Application. You go to the listing of CompReg. You click on the button, and it essentially will provide you with an instance of compound registration. The only thing you have to get in touch for is you have to still purchase a license from us, because it's kind of a bring your own license model at this moment. What are we going to do next? Also, this might be a little intimidating, but overall, I can tell you We are still working a little on streamlining the kind of operations that deal with the bulk uploads, as I've mentioned. There is a lot of change currently going on with respect to user management. This is especially preparing our applications for more CRO-based access, so that you can have your in-house managed users from, say, your LDAP or Active Directory system mapped with some external users that might be managed in a different system. So there's always a little separation typically within organizations, how to manage externals or CROs and internals. Now we have made it possible to combine these kind of user groups within compound registration. You've seen that we've added the kind of review stage so that you can have some sort of an approval workflow with the idea that people are actually submitting as a CRO directly SD files into the system. It gets validated, they get notified about the validation problems, they can fix it by themselves. But at the end of the day, there is a person inside the organization who hits the approval button and say, yes, from now on I would like to move all of this in, and now all of the corporate identifiers are going to be assigned. We also have made some improvements on keeping track of what was the original state of a structure before it hit the registration system, because we have a number of standardization rules that may change how the structure looks like and sometimes even change the actual chemical content if it's necessary. So we keep a full audit from now on the entire fate to a compound structure. What we're going to do in the second half of this year is largely related to bulk operations. Now, that's also following very much the same theme of scaling up the system to work with hundreds to thousands and 10,000s of compounds. Currently, we do a lot of these changes one by one. From now on, you will then be able to say, okay, I'm going to bulk modify structures or some additional data because they had the wrong value, for example, during the upload. You need to correct this somehow. And this is the same two slides that you'd seen yesterday. That's why I don't want to go too much into details here. But I do want to make sure that the message comes across. So the whole point about the perception engine is that whatever file format you use in order to submit something to a combined registration system, it is not the file format that determines what that entity is, but we need to look into what's the actual entity that is hidden inside that file format in order to decide, is that a biological entity or is that a chemical entity or does it sit somewhere in between? And that is the responsibility of the perception engine. What we need for that is the ability to interconvert between sequence space and chemical space. And this is a technology that we have, so we feel very confident that we're able to kind of set up such a system. And because Yanchi has been signaling me already, I think that's all that I'm going to show today. And thank you very much for your attention. And let me know if you have any questions.
You've said that bulk operations are planned in the second half of the year. And what is this stage? What is the limit? How many compounds we can register now using this software?
Through one single bulk upload? Or?
Yes.
So at the moment what we have is we have a kind of built-in or out-of-the-box limitation of about 100 megabytes SD file. That is only there for safety reasons because you require a stable network connection in order to transmit the entire file at once. If you say that you typically don't expect these kind of errors, you can increase the limit manually. And we have people that register a couple of 10,000 compounds at this moment in one operation.
Okay, thank you.